When you first open Nuke, you'll be presented with a screen like you see here. We've got the no graph, properties on the right, the viewer panel and the tools on the left. If you want to increase the size of some of these panels, you can do so by doing a couple things. First off, if you wanted to increase the size of the no graph down here, you can hover over this line here and then drag, and as you can see, if you pull it up, you'll be able to get a lot more real estate and space for the no graph. You can do the exact same thing here with the viewer panel. As you can see here, when I'm dragging it down, it will increase the size of it. Exact same thing over here with the properties panel. I can make it as small or as big as I want. And the exact same thing here with the toolbar. Another thing you can do, if you click on a particular panel, so for instance, if I was to click on the no graph here and hit space, the whole screen will be covered by the no graph. So it will essentially enlarge in whatever panel you hit space on to cover your entire screen. If you wanted to get out of this, you hit space again. I'll show you another demonstration of this. So if I wanted to see the viewer panel at the top here in its entirety, full screen, you simply hover over it and hit space, and as you can see here, the entire viewer panel will be covering the screen. You might notice that we've got a little box here. You're probably wondering what that is the actual viewer, and that's where the image will be projected onto. This will be the boundary of that image. Down here you'll see the resolution. By default I've set it to 1080. I'll show you later how to change that. You might notice that by scrolling in and out like what I'm doing here, that the image box or the viewer is decreasing and increasing in size. If you want this to completely cover the entire screen, you can hit H. As you can see here, when you hit H, it will try and fit this to scale or to the screen. So that's a handy little shortcut to know. You can also hit F, and what F does something very similar to H. As you see, that's what H does. This is what the shortcut F does. And what F does is that it will try and fit the screen, but it will create a little bit of a buffer zone between the bottom, top of frames so that you can get a bit more clearance and a bit more buffer, if that makes sense. In comparison to, say, here, the bottom and the top can clip at the top there, but that's neither here or there. Both of them are still very handy. You can customize your interface to your liking. So for instance, there are a couple of preset user interfaces that you can choose from out of the box. So if you go at the top here to workspace, and if you go into, well, as you can see here, you can actually create your own custom workspace. And to actually do that, I won't go into too much detail, but you can essentially, like for instance, no graph, I could click on the little panel here for it and then drag it, and say if I wanted the no graph to appear there, I can have the no graph appear there, if that makes sense, and then have my nodes coming through out there. You can play around with that to your desire. Say if you wanted to save this, because usually Nuke actually doesn't save your custom creations on your workspace. So what you need to do, you would need to, create your workspace and then go here and then go save workspace. And then what will happen is that your saved workspace will be coming up under here. As you can see, we've got a bunch of default workspaces here: compositing, large no graph, large viewer, scripting, so on and so forth. And then you've got at the bottom will be whatever custom workspace you've got. So for instance, I've got one here when I was working at Luma that I've used from time to time. And as you can see here, I've got the way I've set mine up. I've got the viewer panel here. I've got the no graph here, and the properties there. You can play around with whatever workspace you prefer. There's no right or wrong way to go about it. It's as long as you can get the work done and it works for you, then it's absolutely fine. To save your Nuke script, you can go to the top left here under File, and you've got a bunch of options here. You can save the comp, save comp as well as saving a new comp version. We can also open a recent comp. So for instance, as you can see here, it gives me all of these different scripts that I've been working on over the last couple days, weeks. When you hit on or click save comp, for instance, as you can see here, it will open up a file directory window. And as you can see here, I've set Nuke to save any bit of Nuke script that I'm working on into this project folder here. Like with most file management practices, it's very important to keep as organized as you possibly can. So for instance, have a dedicated folder for your Nuke projects, another folder for your Nuke renders, and so on and so forth. I definitely recommend you install that habit when working within Nuke, because you can easily get lost and you can get bogged down in trying to figure out, okay, where did my render end up, or where did I save my Nuke project? And the worst thing that you could be wasting your time on is trying to find out where you saved and rendered everything. It's a bit of a nightmare. And yeah, so if you can avoid that and instill a very good habit of keeping your files organized, then you'll be on the right track.
All right, now let's get into the fun stuff. So to import a file, whether it be an image file or a video file, we would need to use a read node. A read node, well, it's pretty self-explanatory. It will read in a particular file and will bring it into the node graph at the bottom here. There's two ways that you can create a read node. So the first thing would be to hit tab on your keyboard and then type in read. Just for future reference, using this is essentially what you will need to do in order to create any type of node within Nuke. As you can see here, when I hit tab, you've got a whole plethora of different nodes that you can choose from. That's just for future notice. Anyway, so if we go read, and if we click on read, as you can see here, we've got a file directory window that pops up. What you would do then is that you would then choose or import whatever file that you want to bring into Nuke. So for instance, I'm just going to bring in this mob right here of this stadium. And as you can see here within the node graph, we have the MOV that I've just imported pop up at the bottom here in the node graph. Another way that you can create a read node is by simply hitting R on your keyboard. That's the shortcut for a read node. And as you can see here, as soon as I hit R, the file directory window pops up straight away. Now then, we've got our image here, or footage. How do we actually view it? And how do we actually get this to show up here in the viewer panel? It's quite simple. We've got this viewer node down here. This viewer node essentially will view whatever image or footage that you want it to view, if that makes sense. So for instance, if I was to click on this stadium MOV that I've imported and hit 1 on my keyboard, as you can see here, the viewer node will connect this pipe directly into this file which I selected, and in turn this file's image will now be present at the top here in the viewer panel. Just so there's no confusion, for instance, if I was to hit 1 without selecting this file, it will not work. So it's very important, if you want to view something, you got to make sure to highlight it by selecting it, or Control A, and hit 1 on your keyboard, and it will view. Another thing that you can do with the viewer nodes, say for instance I'll create a constant, and constant is just a flat color. This is just for demonstration purposes. If I wanted to view multiple images or different outputs at the same time, what you can do, so you see here we've got the one pipe connected into this stadium MOV. If I wanted to view this, what you can do, if you click on whatever file or node you want to view and hit 2, as you can see, the viewer node will create another pipe with the number 2 on it that will connect into another node or file. And then what you can do, if you want to, and this is very important because I use this technique a lot when I'm doing quality checking, it's very handy because what you can do, you can then backtrack and go back and forth, cycling through each file or image by going back and forth between 1 and 2 by hitting 1 and 2 on your keyboard. You can repeat this process and you can, have the viewer attached to 3, 4, 5, 6 different files simultaneously. Then you can use the numpad or the numbers on your keyboard to cycle through each of those, which is very, very handy.
To delete a node, you'd simply click on it and then hit delete or backspace. The next thing we'll need to do now is to set the project settings of Nuke. Now that we've got an imported file, we can use this as reference when matching our project settings. So to bring up the project settings options, we can hit S on our keyboard. And as you can see here to the right, the project settings will pop up under the properties panel. We've got the frame range, frames per second, as well as the file size format that we can change. So looking at this particular Stadium MOV file, we can see that it is 227 frames long. So it'll end on 227 and it will start at frame 1. So what we can do, we go back into our project settings, and by default, whatever image that you import initially, it will set the frame range to that file, if that makes sense. But for instance, if the client turned around and said, okay, we only need about 100 frames of this footage for you to work on, you can actually go in here and say, okay, I'll change it to 100. And as you can see here, the timeline at the bottom here will change accordingly to that new frame range that you've set. For now, I'm just going to set it to exactly the length of the MOV, which is 227. I'm then going to, what you can do is that you can actually click on the Stadium MOV or whatever file you're working on, and it will come up with a bunch of information of this file here under the properties panel. As you can see here, by default, the format for it is 1080. You can see the frame range. We can see the color space, whether it's in lin or log, linear or logarithmic. Through there, we can use this to sort of help us set our project. So looking at this, we can see that by default, it's 1080p. So what we can do, we can go back into the project settings by hitting S, clicking on the file size format, and as you can see, we've got a plethora of options that we can change. You can do 4K, 2K, 1080p, 720, and so on and so forth. But what you can do is, in this case, we want to match it to 1080. So we can go and find the 1080 option, which is here, click on it, and now our project is set accordingly to that. Why do we actually set the project settings? Well, very simply, when we get to the stage where we render out or we write out our final image, it will write out in accordance to the settings that we've set here. So for instance, if I left this, even though this is a 1080p file that we're working on, if I was to leave it to default or in another file format, for instance 2K, the actual render will come out as 2K, for instance. So that's why it's very important to keep your project settings consistent to whatever footage that you're working on.